The only possession that I was allowed to take from the foster home that day were books, my favorite books that a kind neighbor used to often bring me. And so when I go to stay with John Sykes, I stacked my books neatly in his living room, which is where I slept that night. Well, the next morning when he walks in, he sees my books stacked neatly, and he says, "You've read these?" And I said, "Yes, these are my favorites." And he says, "Well, have you ever thought about taking advanced placement English?" And I said, "Advanced placement English? I mean, Mr. Sykes, I'm not ready for that. Those are for the smart kids." And he says, "Well, I really think that you should give it a try. Go see Mrs. Rose. She's the AP English teacher. Tell her I've sent you and that I think that you should take advanced placement English." So a couple weeks later, that's exactly what I do. But he gives me very specific instructions. He says, "You have to get the syllabus." I didn't know what the syllabus was. He says, "You have to get the syllabus," which is a list of books that they have read in the first semester, because you're going to have to catch up, he tells me. He's very specific about this. You're going to have to catch up. He goes, "Get the syllabus, bring it home, and then you and I will talk about it." So I do that. I get the syllabus, I look at the list of books, and then we sit down for dinner. And he says, "So what did you think about the books that they've read in the first semester?" And I said, "Mr. Sykes, they've read Romeo and Juliet, and I read that. And then they read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and I read that. And then they read Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and I read that too." He says, "Well, what are they reading in the second semester?" I said, "Well, they're reading John Milton's Paradise Lost, but I've already read that." I said, "And then they're reading the poem Ulysses by Tennyson, and I've read that too." He says, "You've read Ulysses by Tennyson?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "So what is your favorite part of Ulysses?" And I said, "Oh, Mr. Sykes, that's easy. Tennyson said, 'Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.'" Well, that always spoke to me. That was my life mantra, that I wasn't going to yield. His point to me was that I perhaps had been asking myself the wrong question. Maybe the question wasn't whether I was ready for advanced placement English. Maybe the question was whether or not advanced placement English was ready for me. And so from that experience, I've learned that you ought not to doubt yourself, that there are times you have to quiet that inner voice that says, "I can't do this. This isn't possible." The success actually is probably a secondary thing. That was John Sykes' point to me. We don't know how it'll turn out, but the leaping, well, that's the real lesson. Give it a try and see what happens.